It's great to visit with you, Laura. It really is. And you have such an interesting career, actually. Years of professorship and community action combined. Can you give me a sense of how that began, of what your trajectory is?
Sure. So my career, I am a product of the early 1990s. So 1991, my first job out of college, I was working for GE, General Electric. Oh, I had the worst job in the world, but with a degree in political science, there wasn't a whole lot of options. And everyone I worked with was miserable. We were the collection unit. Oh, it was just awful. But what happened while I was there is a handful of us, and this was when Jack Welch was the chairman and CEO, to be able to start a community action team where employees could get a day off a month if they were going to be doing service together, organized by GE in the community. And when we did that, I experienced magic. People were happy, they were serving, they were giving back, teams were growing, and I thought, this is super cool. So I knew I didn't want to work there for the rest of my life, but I started taking some classes at Loyola University of Chicago in human development. And one of the days that I arrived to campus after work at GE, I found a book in the library or the bookstore called Involving Colleges, written by Kuju. And it was all about all of the other learning that goes on beyond the intellectual dump of what happens in the classroom. And I thought, exactly, this is what I've always experienced. Is, I was a first generation college student. I wanted everyone to have that experience. So fast forward, I knew I belonged in higher education, and I knew I belonged, I thought at the time, the student affairs side of the house, where the co-curricular activity and service learning was taking place, and so on and so forth. Understanding, once being in that environment, that the academic side of the house also carried a little more weight politically, and so on and so forth. So I wanted to explore both worlds and figure out how you get those worlds to work together as an institution. But what I cared about in the classroom was I started recognizing that some learning communities had just the greatest experience and others really did not. I had the privilege of participating in giving out scholarships, and some of the programs had bells and whistles like mentoring and monthly gatherings. And others were just about a check, and others were just about signing a piece of paper. And I really wanted to understand, what was it about learning communities that could foster a holistic approach to teaching and learning. And so that really, for 20 years, that became a thrust of my research and practice. My PhD was actually entitled Learning Communities that Foster Intellectual, Social, Emotional, and Spiritual Development. And because I was an administrator and a professor, I had the sandbox of trying out new things, and what would shift a culture, and what exposes people to vulnerability, and how do you build trust, and what are the necessary ingredients for those kinds of things to happen. With the understanding, because of witnessing more creative activity taking place, people feeling closer alignment to their purpose, when all of those ingredients are there. So I really worked at Arizona State University for a number of years in that capacity. I taught some classes, leadership through service and leadership through action, which was really drawn from Parker Palmer's work and Wayne Muller's work. Who am I? What are my gifts? How do I share them with the world? What is my purpose, my calling, those types of things. Service always being a big piece of that. And then some, let's see, after 17 years, came out to the Claremont area. Claremont School of Theology was experimenting with a new kind of university, a vision that drew me to this area. At the time, the vision was to be an interfaith based campus to bring people from around the world together. I was so drawn to that mission that my whole family relocated here to Claremont. And And that was a really interesting exercise, experiment in higher education. And I learned a lot from that, and especially about the importance of culture. And I also grew spiritually during this period as well, because, I had been raised, I would say, a holiday Catholic. And in my early 20s, wanted to deepen my own spiritual understanding. So I, at the time, thought, well, grow where you're planted. You were born into Catholicism, go deeper into that. And I did a 3-year discernment in the Dominican laity. St. Dominic was a guy who used to go out to pubs and sit down with people, the heretics, and get people charged up. And I thought he was a character, so I kind of followed. In St. Catherine of Siena, the Doctor of Education, felt sort of a compelled place. Okay, let's start here, and it didn't go real far for me. I was still sort of spiritually unfulfilled. So coming at that same time in my personal growth, coming out to Claremont for an interfaith experiment was really exciting for me. I got exposed to lots of world religions that beyond my, periphery and superficial understanding. And so I went through a lot of personal growth as well. And part of what came out of that was the birth of the Human Value Center, because there was a real sense, a calling, a sort of an urgency that, there's a real need here for humanity to pay better attention to its evolution. And so that's where I am today, is with the Human Value Center.
Well, that's just so interesting to me, and I'm sure to everybody. So are you still a practicing Catholic, or did you?
Oh gosh, no, I'm not. I wouldn't identify myself with any faith tradition. But about a year ago, I went to the Thich Nhat Hanh Plum Village in Bordeaux, France. And I would say that is probably the closest alignment I have to a particular approach to my understanding of my place in the cosmos and my connection to, what I believe is one spiritual being. We are part of a greater consciousness that is one.
Got it. I have to admit, it sounds a little like process theology and process philosophy to me. The idea that there's an inclusive consciousness in which we participate, and we're connected to everything, actually. In the mindfulness tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh also touches me and many others, but among other things, its emphasis on listening, on actually being present to others and hearing them on their terms and their stories. And I'm imagining that was kind of part of the draw, the lure, the spiritual lure that maybe took you into working with the Charter for Compassion as well. Can you tell me about that side of things? Where does the Charter for Compassion come in for you?
Sure. So I was introduced to Joan Brown Campbell, who many people in the Cobb community probably with whom are familiar. She's been a spiritual leader and involved in, I think, 2 presidential administrations as the faith leader, and so forth. And she was active with the Charter for Compassion. That was started by Karen Armstrong, closer to 15 years ago now. I was introduced maybe 8 or 9 years ago. The Charter for Compassion has a vision that is truly beautiful. And it's really a network of networks of organizations that are helping us move in the right direction. It's a fragile yet mighty organization. So, I've been active as a volunteer and as a board member now for a number of years. But it's been really beautiful because thanks to the internet, it truly is a very international, very lively organization with sectors doing work, not just in Compassionate Cities, which is a major initiative, but also in the sectors. So social justice, environment, gender issues, whatever the collective cause might be, and bringing people to, share best practices and so forth in one place.
Can you tell me a bit about what that has meant in Pomona? How does the work of the Charter get embodied right where you live, or how do you hope to have it embodied? What's happening in Pomona? I think that's my question.
That's a beautiful question, Jay. So about 6 years ago, I had met Jan Chase, and she is an activist and a faith leader in Pomona. And there was a grassroots effort to bring compassion to Pomona. But there was a disconnect between, I'll say, grass tops and grassroots. And so getting buy-in from leadership is really important in manifesting compassion. It's one thing to have a rallying group of people to cry for peace and love. It's another to start infiltrating the systems. And so what we were able to do in Pomona several years ago was to make Pomona an officially compassionate city, passing a resolution, being recognized by the Charter for Compassion, which is really our North Star, our mothership. You know, it's exciting for people to feel they're part of something larger than themselves. So first you had a group of concerned citizens, and that grew to a critical mass of concerned citizens. And then they started engaging with the leadership. And so we were part of that by bringing in some training and education about, well, what is compassion? What does compassion look like? What does it mean to me? How would I know it when I saw it? How can I activate it? How can we measure it? You know, all of these types of things. You know, when you bring a room full of people together, and we did this in Pomona, we had first responders, police and fire, we had mental health professionals, we had faith leaders, we had undocumented residents, we had city personnel, and of course, just as you would expect, people sort of congregated to those who they know. But after going through, you know, a couple of days together and then continuing for a couple of months together, people saw one another as a person and not by the office that they represent or you know, the garb that they wear alone. So Compassionate Pomona began with the support of the city, with the support of major sectors, PUSD, the education, and others, where they began meeting on a regular basis. And I'll tell you, working closely with Pomona, there's been a psychological shift in a positive direction. There's more hope in Pomona. There's a spirit in Pomona that people can't quite put their finger on. And we have great leadership in the mayor. And again, you're starting to see a lot of collaboration. And I think we share that as a shared value, the Cobb Institute and the Human Value Center. Without cooperation and collaboration, we won't move forward, and we can't address, you know, our greatest challenges of the day without it. So Pomona is a really exciting place. And as a result of becoming a compassionate city, I think that was like fertilizing the soil, if you will, to other compassionate initiatives, well-being initiatives. For example, EcoCiv and the Latina Roundtable worked together with a city council person to look at new economy possibilities. New economy, we redefined it as new well-being economy. And, you know, one of the projects that we're doing right now, in fact, it launches April 17th. Jay, you're welcome to join us in Pomona for a 30-day challenge on well-being. But we're going to do a deeper dive into self-knowledge. So we have a whole week just that's a kind of a gamified light touch of starting to create that awareness. Who am I and what are my gifts? And that self-knowledge, you know, a lot of people have never asked themselves those kinds of questions. And so we've spent a week on that challenge. Then we move into engaging with others. And so there'll be a week about you know, expanding our worldview in delicate ways, in light ways. So we might show a video of a woman speaking with a very rich accent, and she's reading a piece of poetry. What does that accent mean to you when you hear that accent? It might mean my grandmother. It might mean, you know, a scary person down the street. I don't know. But, you know, so you start getting this dialogue and people start to story tell and story listen. And so the key for us, you brought up listening earlier, Jay, and listening is a skill, right? It's something that we have to practice. And so the week that we spend just engaging in storytelling and story listening, we also hope that we're starting to plant seeds of how we engage with one another. The third week of the Pomona Challenge is looking at passions and issues of things that we care about in Pomona, and imagining the future. So it's not a week of complaining about what's not right. It's a week of celebrating our assets and imagining the future that we want to have. So for example, we're very involved with the police, and in supporting police in their inner development. What's the future relationship that Pomona would like to see with its police or community safety? So it's also about planting seeds of social re-architecturing and creating a space for co-creation to imagine that.
Well, that too is just so interesting. As you were getting started, were there different understandings of compassion that had to be worked through, or was there a kind of a common understanding intuitively on everybody's part? Can you say a word about that? How did people think about compassion?
So I've been involved for 8 years, and I just came from a board retreat, and we still can't come to a conclusion. But it's about suffering with honestly. We this morning, is it joyful compassion? Can you be joyful in compassion?
Yeah.
So I think though it's about authenticity, and it's about our heart tells us the truth all the time, and it's about acting on the truth.
Mm-hmm. I think in the process world, we believe that we can actually feel the feelings of others, that we're connected with one another objectively in many, many ways, but also we're connected with one another for good or ill, emotionally. And there's a notion of that the feelings of others are actually part of what we always are. We're not just ourselves, we're also their feelings too, as an ingredient in us. But those feelings can be joyful as well as sorrowful. So compassion means sharing in the joys as well as sharing in the suffering, not just sharing in the suffering, also the joys. I'm wondering if community building doesn't involve a good bit of that identification, the naming of shared joys, or does it? What's your experience?
Well, I need to learn more about process, because everything you're saying, I believe and desire for more awareness. So as we raise consciousness and we raise frequency, more people will naturally embody this, because we're all on this sort of human evolutionary trajectory. But I've kind of lost your question with compassion.
Just
it manifests, but the shared experience and the shared emotion.
Shared joy as well as shared suffering. The role of sharing joys. Any thoughts about that?
Well, and one of the reasons, service is so important and we know science will tell us it's actually good for us. So, it can be joyful to be in suffering. Absolutely. And I'm just saying it on a cellular level, it's good for us. And I just love hearing you say that, because the shared experience is what makes us more humane.
Yeah. Now, in your understanding of compassion in Pomona, does the sharing of experience include the more than human world? Animals and plants, hills and rivers, the environment, however understood, but animals and plants, tell me a little bit about the fullness of compassion from your perspective.
I believe that every compassionate city is slightly different geographically and culturally, but in Pomona, it is 100% embracing the spiritual realm, all of nature in oneness, and you witness that in the sort of the butterfly. It's like a lamp, and there are just more and more people joining the compassionate Pomona movement, and also helping others to be mindful of, even in the language we use in writing, statements and things. I see Pomona as a compassionate group being very, very inclusive in its, not just in its ideology, but also in its actions.
And so it's eco-compassion, not only human to human, but human to the natural world. Yeah. Now,
on a global level, that's language that's been that's I've just spent the last several days working with is, yeah.
Well, that's so true to what we want to be about too. In the process world, we sometimes speak of three hopes: whole people, and whole communities, and a whole planet. And those are aspirational ideals. I mean, they're us, but they are good ideals. And I'm assuming that whole planet plays a role also in the mindset, the consciousness of the compassionate movement per se, but also in your case, the Pomona context.
Absolutely.
Where does the big world fit in? I think that's my question. The planet.
Well, so I was just telling you about our well-being challenge. One of the things that the design of this is to support the IDGs, the inner development goals. Are you familiar with the inner development?
I'm not.
So the SDGs, the sustainable development goals for 2030, from an environmental and human standpoint, you're familiar with those, of course. Well, we're not getting there, right? So now 2030 is right around the corner, and some reflection has demonstrated that we forgot about the human system, the human part of getting there. And so the IDGs is a new framework to mirror achieving those SDGs, which are the global and planetary goals.
What does IDG stand for again?
Inner development goals.
Inner as in INNER? Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really about, your relationship to self and spirit, your intellectual and knowledge, your ability to collaborate and engage with others from a social standpoint, and also how we engage to enact change.
Oh, that's beautiful. I'm so glad. So I have a friend who's 14 years old. And she sometimes comes to me, she's a teenager, and she says, what can I do in my way to help make the world a better place? And I say, well, I think it might help to listen to some people who have that same aspiration and to learn from them and with them. And they'll listen to you too. It's mutual, of course. But it doesn't hurt to have mentors. And many people, I myself, think of you as a mentor. I think of you as someone who's given so much in so many settings, and you're still doing it. So I guess I'd like to ask you, what advice would you give to my 14-year-old friend early in the journey, but wanting in her way to share, to walk in footsteps that look a bit like yours?
Well, that's a really wonderful question, and I have to share with you, I've delighted in posing this question to people sprinkled across the last 48 hours, and it's really a great question for those of us who are on the sunny side of 50. The first piece of advice that I would give is service to others, because any form, and that can help excavate your passions and your joys, but serving others, that really fosters, crystallizing what's meaningful and purposeful for you. And it also provides a human connection that we all crave and we all need to be part of. So service is number one, and there's so many big and small ways that we can do that, organized, informally. We all have access to be able to serve. Even if our 9-to-5 job isn't something that gives us the meaning and purpose, the service can. So the service is definitely number one. My second piece of advice to your 14-year-old friend is to find a meditation practice. I prefer a breath-based meditative practice. And again, for the science versus spirituality, the science and spirituality persons, this will give you all of the reasons why it's good for your body and it's good for your mind, but I will say it's also good for your soul. And so find a practice that works for you. And then my third would be, to listen to your heart, because doubts creep in all the time. And I mentioned earlier, there is divine in each of us. And so remembering that is really, really important. So walk knowing that you are divine.
I love those bits of advice, and need them myself. And I too follow a breath-based practice. So I know the value of that. Sometimes that can be a hard sell, is not the right word, but I can't think of another way to put it. Hard sell to a 14-year-old, a teenager. Is that your experience? Or by contrast, have you experienced that those bits of advice actually can indeed take root and touch the hearts of younger people?
Compassionate Pomona is another great example. Sky meditation is a breath-based practice that literally hundreds of school children and teachers have been trained in and are practicing. And they see the results in their ability to self-regulate emotions and to start naming things. So it's partly a culture shift, Jay. I think, I have folks in my family who make fun of me, for, doing a Buddha pose. So yeah, I think we're seeing though that there's a real shift with focusing on younger kids and making it more mainstream. And I think, that's where there has been confusion with religion and spiritual practices. And are we allowed to demonstrate? Prayer can be a beautiful restorative form for people. And so, we've shut off so many great things that we've learned from spiritual practices from school. But if we can integrate this, because it does promote health and well-being, and there's a mind, body, spirit connection, that I think we're seeing a shift in a younger generation that is totally open. And that makes sense because we're seeing organized religion with a bit of a nosedive, but spiritual, but not religious, and nuns and so forth. But there's a yearning, there's a hunger for a deep connection, and finding tools that can help foster that would be a good way to go.
So can you give me just a picture of the sky practice? Remind me of the phrase again? Sky
breathing.
Sky breathing, yeah. Can you paint a little picture? I just like to picture it a bit of a session
of it.
Yeah.
Sure. There's a bellows breath where we teach the kids and adults that you have your hands in a loose fist and you inhale. And you do this 10 times, and then you pause and you feel the tingling in your body, and you notice what's happening. And it's kind of like a car wash of the brain. All of a sudden, everything that was in your head and the monkey mind, or whatever, you call it, the thoughts that are running around, they kind of dissipate, and you've just brought all this new oxygen into your body. So you're also a little bit more energetic, and kids learn, they can do these things. And
I bet so. Yeah. A little word about process thought here. You've heard of the philosopher Whitehead, very abstract, hard to understand, etc. But he had an interesting idea. He said, it's a phrase, he called it the withness of the body, WITHNESS. And he said, always our bodies are with us. And so to learn to live with the withness of the body. And I think those breathing meditations, sky breathing among them, are examples of people remembering and taking sympathetic advantage of the fact that our bodies can be profound allies in a life well lived. So what's your future? What do you hope for yourself or for Pomona 5 years from now? I'll put it that way.
Well, my hope for Pomona is I just feel like Pomona has the potential to be a beautiful model that can be replicated elsewhere. We work really closely with We All California, the Wellbeing Alliance, and there are cities who are looking for answers, looking for ways of moving forward. And Pomona's had the courage to do some pretty bold things, and it's proving to be pretty beautiful. So my hope is that that Pomona will continue to flourish and will continue to be the future that its people imagine, and that we can bring that to more communities.
Well, we want to help. We want to learn from you, and we want to spread the good news of what you're doing and what Pomona is doing.
Great.
So a deep thank you to you and to all the work that you're doing and all the folks in Pomona.
Yes, it is because of a lot of people in Pomona, that is for sure. Well, Jay, thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to engaging more with the Cobb Institute and learning more about process. It sounds like we are very, very much aligned.
Partners in the journey. Peace be with you. Take care.
Thank you.